In 1965, in the Kazakh desert, they buried a 140 kiloton bomb in the bed of a dry river and set it off. It punched the crater 400 meters across, and the crater filled with water. Today, it's a calm blue lake, ringed by low hills. People visit it, and if you didn't know its name, Atomic Lake, you would swear it had been sitting there quietly for 100,000 years. That resemblance is where a much stranger question begins, because the world is dotted with near-perfect circular lakes, round, deep, still. And we're handed a short list of explanations for all of them. A meteorite hit here, a volcano collapsed there, the ground dissolved and sank. Hundreds of thousands of years old, sometimes millions. Case closed. But look at that Kazakh lake, a hole made by a single blast 60 years ago, and then look at a natural crater lake we're told is ancient. Side by side on Google Earth, you cannot always tell which is which. The fresh wound and the old scar look the same. So a handful of researchers started asking a question that sounds absurd until you sit with the pictures. How do we actually know how old these are? And how do we know what made them? I'm not going to hand you an answer because I don't have one. What I can tell you is that once you've seen a bomb crater and a natural million-year-old lake sitting next to each other, you don't look at a round lake the same way again. If that's your kind of question, stay with me. Start with the craters there's no argument about. In the Nevada test site, in a stretch of desert called Yucca Flat, the ground is pockmarked with hundreds of round craters, the scars of 739 nuclear tests, nearly 4 out of every 5 detonations carried out there. From above, on Google Earth, it looks like the surface of the moon. One of them, Sedan Crater, is big enough to sit on the National Register of Historic Places. A single device, buried and fired, threw out 12 million tons of earth and left a hole a quarter of a mile wide. Then there's the softer evidence, the wounds that heal. In the forests of Germany, at Peenemünde and the Western Wald, the old World War II bomb craters have quietly filled with water and moss. Walk past one now and it's a pretty little forest pond. In Laos, the most heavily bombed country in history, whole fields are stippled with round ponds, each one a former explosion, now green and full of frogs. Here's the thing the researchers keep returning to. We know these are wounds, we can date them, we have the footage, and within a single human lifetime, sometimes within a few years, a violent crater becomes something that looks completely natural, peaceful, old. So what happens to one of these when the paperwork is gone? Now set the natural lakes beside them. Meteor Crater in Arizona is, the mainstream theory says, a genuine impact, a nickel-iron rock about 50 meters across, roughly 50,000 years ago. But hold its photograph next to Sedan Crater in Nevada. One was carved by a rock from space over 50,000 years, and the other was made by a device in 1962. And to the eye, they are the same object. The article that set this off pushes the comparison harder, and this is where it crosses from observation into theory, so hold it as theory. Take Kingsley Lake in Florida, so perfectly round that pilots call it the silver dollar. We're told it's a sinkhole. Or Lake Defuniak in Florida, said to be one of only 2 perfectly round natural lakes on Earth, where even the official story shrugs, unknown origins, with local folklore pointing to a meteor. Or Kankaria Lake in India, an enormous circular basin we're told was dug by hand in 1451, and one researcher asks the flat human question that textbooks skip. A lake that wide and that deep dug with hand tools, where did all the dirt go? None of this proves anything. The mainstream theory isn't nothing, the ground does dissolve and rocks do fall. But sit with the pattern and something nags. One tidy list of causes, a whole world covered in round holes, and a way of dating them that, as we just saw, a single lifetime of moss can quietly defeat. Here's where it stops being about single lakes. Pull up certain regions on Google Earth and the ground isn't dotted with a lake or two, it's peppered, fields of them. Northern Florida, a stretch of Siberia, Uganda. Hundreds of round and near-round depressions packed across the landscape, as if something scattered them all at once. The official readings are local and separate. Sinkholes here, old volcanic vents there, dissolved limestone somewhere else. Every field, its own explanation. Independent researchers who've dug into this won't accept that the tidy chart is the whole chart. Their argument, the official map of the world's impact sites shows only a fraction of what's actually out there. It leaves out the karst lakes, the clustered smaller lakes, the suspicious groups, and, they say, plenty that haven't even been cataloged yet. And here's where my own thinking runs off the rails a little, so take it as exactly that. On the standard impact map, almost every crater looks like it was made by something coming straight down, a path perpendicular to the ground, not grazing in at an angle the way a falling rock usually does, as if it came from directly above. Hold that, it's about to matter. Because there is an older record of holes falling from the sky. Across the ancient world, cultures that never met tell the same kind of story. A war fought not between armies, but between gods, with weapons that behaved like nothing a sword or a spear ever could. The one people return from most is the Indian epic the Mahabharata, and the weapon in it called the Brahmastra, described as a single projectile set to carry the power of the entire universe, a weapon of last resort that was never meant to be used. Read the old lines cold, and some researchers argue they sound less like poetry and more like a witness reaching for words he doesn't have. A light brighter than 1,000 suns, a column of smoke and fire, the dead burned past recognition, survivors whose hair and nails fell away in the days after. Now, that's an interpretation, a bold one, and the people making it will tell you plainly they can't prove the epic describes a real event, but set it beside the pattern from a minute ago. A whole world covered in round scars, a clock that a lifetime of moss can beat, and craters that look punched straight down from overhead. The people chasing this think the oldest stories and the round lakes might be describing the same event. They even have a name for it, the War of the Gods. So which is it? The grounded reading is the one the mainstream theory gives, and it deserves a fair hearing. Meteors fall, volcanoes collapse into calderas, limestone dissolves and the land sinks. Mainstream science says these lakes have been dated by methods that don't care what any of us wants to be true, and that most of the numbers hold. And the resemblance between a bomb crater and a meteor crater, it argues, was never a secret. It's physics. A sudden release of enormous energy makes a round hole, whatever the source. Of course they look alike. The other reading doesn't need the mainstream theory to be wrong about everything, only to have missed something, that the map is incomplete, that some of these dates rest on assumptions no one has ever watched fail, and that the human race, nearly everywhere, remembers a fire that fell from directly above, remembered by people who never met, and pressed that memory into its oldest books. Both readings agree on one uncomfortable point. The fresh wound and the ancient scar are almost impossible to tell apart. The only thing standing between them is the date we were handed. We don't know how many of the world's round lakes are impacts, how many are sinkholes, and how many are something we don't yet have a name for. The people chasing the wild version admit freely that they can't prove a war of gods ever happened, but they've put a finger on the thing that's genuinely hard to answer. A violent crater and a peaceful ancient lake can look identical, and the moss grows over both. So the real question was never what made these holes, it's how sure we can be of the story we tell about the ones nobody watched form. Tell me where you land. Nature, chance, or something the oldest books were trying to warn us about? I read the comments, and if a fire that fell from directly above, remembered by people who never met, stays with you, then the old maps that seem to forget whole seas, like Hudson Bay, are the thread we pull next.